as much.
This is episode 19 of the Wash Talk podcast with Naina Lal Kidwai of the India Sanitation Coalition. Welcome to the Wash Talk podcast series from IRC. My name is Andy Narracott, and this is the podcast where we open up the discussion on what the wash sector needs to do to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Thanks for spending some time with us today. Now let's get started. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has made sanitation a political priority when he launched the Swachh Bharat mission, which aims to make the country open defecation free by 2019. It will then rid itself of being the world's largest open defecator. This means there is a lot of government funding for sanitation initiatives that help meet the 2019 target, while large businesses are also encouraged to spend part of their mandatory CSR funds, equivalent to 2% of profits, on sanitation. So huge opportunities for India at the moment. Today we're talking to Naina Lal Kidwai about progress and challenges India has to confront to meet this audacious goal, and some of the initiatives that the India Sanitation Coalition are getting behind. But before we dive in, make sure you head over to ircwash.org/washtalk to review the show notes and associated resources. So without any further ado, let's jump in. Hello everyone, today I'm talking with Naina Lal Kidwai about the sanitation challenge in India. Naina is a banker and former CEO of HSBC India, and she's also the founder chair of the India Sanitation Coalition. She's strong views about sanitation and environment, which she expresses in her new book, Survive or Sink, an Action Agenda for Sanitation, Water, Pollution and Green Finance. So it's wonderful to have her on the show today, as India nears its target of making the country open defecation free by the 2nd of October 2019, which is the 150th anniversary of the birth of Mahatma Gandhi. So welcome onto the show, Naina.
Thank you, Andy. Delighted to be doing this with you.
Wonderful, but it's great to have you on the show and with such deep knowledge, having written your book. In the book, you actually call for a holistic approach to tackle poor sanitation, water and environmental pollution. Interested from your perspective why you think it's really important that sanitation is seen from all these different sides, from the health, social, environmental and from an economic perspective.
You know, to start with, Andy, the whole India sanitation agenda in India, which is such an important one, with the Prime Minister himself calling for action from the ramparts of the Red Fort 2 months into office, was just such an exciting time to be here in India. And initially, the targets were very much around toilet building, which is clearly important. You can't expect people to use toilets if you don't have toilets. But in fact, as we set out at the India Sanitation Coalition, which had actually been conceived of and started before this great announcement of the Swachh Bharat mission by our Prime Minister, and our agenda was holistic in terms of an approach that went from build, use, maintain, and treat, so that the entire chain of sanitation was focused on. So one aspect of it was to ensure we didn't stop at just the building of toilets, the behavior change that was important to ensure people use the toilets, the fact that the toilets needed to be maintained so they didn't fall to disrepair. And now what is a critical agenda at this moment, because we've actually crossed through that chain of build, use, and to some extent the maintain piece, is as we move to what we're calling ODF plus, which is the treatment side, because otherwise we will have had one of the most expensive experiments in history where we basically funneled all the shit into toilets, but then it just finds its way right back into the fields and water bodies, which is exactly what we were trying to save in the first place.
Absolutely. And in India is very much a rural and urban divide. There's huge urban growth within Indian cities, and that calls for different solutions. Can you explain why you call for, these two contexts, rural and urban, to be treated so differently?
And, exactly as you say, they're different. And surprisingly, the agenda of sanitation has been easier at the rural level, where villages have embraced sanitation far quicker than we have been able to provide solutions in urban India. And so in rural India, the focus was largely around provision of toilets. The government had an excellent subsidy mechanism. We brought in microfinance for sanitation, so there was financing for sanitation for the bits that government was not subsidizing or being able to provide the funds for. And toilets, lo and behold, came up at the rate of knots. Corporate India jumped in, the government providing these programs, individual citizens coming forth with their savings. And we got a sanitation agenda with a very simple technology, largely, which is a twin pit technology, which works quite readily in the rural framework. And I think this success story, which has seen India's provision of toilets go from 40% coverage to 80% coverage.
Wow.
And with a number of states, and I think, we've got rank sort of failures of two of our big states in the north, which are the laggards right now. But other than them, pretty much all the states are well on target in terms of the actual provision of toilets. So the behavior change piece and the building of toilets, very effective in rural India. In urban India, in fact, we didn't need as much of the behavior change messaging because people were crying for toilets. The issue was the alternatives were not readily available. Community toilets have by and large been a failure. We have some systems where these work, and we're now looking to replicate these. But, where to set these up, land is an issue. Where you need these toilets are slums, so the land doesn't exist for the building of the toilets. And then people in the slums don't want that community toilet to come up next to them. So it's a big fight as to where to get the toilets going. And for each slum dweller with so little space to live in, to actually build their own toilet becomes a challenge. But lo and behold, many are doing this. You see these tiny little toilets that are coming up because the need to have it, the behavior change piece of this, it has been well achieved. The issue has been much more around both the technology of having these small toilets or having working community toilets, which can be the shared toilet in a pay-for-use type of model. So the challenge in urban India is indeed a lot different. But the biggest challenge for us in urban India is going to be the treatment side of it, because the sewage connections really don't exist. And where that coverage isn't there, the process for actually getting the fecal sludge treated is very, very critical. And I think a very high focus for us now going forward into the next few years.
Yeah, absolutely. And this brings to mind IRC's program on watershed empowering citizens program, which aims to strengthen the capacity of civil society to help and improve governance and management of wash services as well as water resources. And they draw on all aspects of the stakeholder landscape. I mean, in your book, you stress that everyone, citizens, industry, civil society, media, the government, all need to collaborate to address sanitation, poor sanitation, water and pollution. And this sounds like it needs to happen. But can you clarify? I mean, who do you think is in charge here? Is it something that the government needs to take responsibility for, or it can be left up for the market to take on?
It's a great question, Andy. And, we are still struggling with the solutions. But the purpose with which we set up the India Sanitation Coalition was this much needed collaboration. In fact, one of the inspirations for those of us who set this up was there were 4 not-for-profits working in Bihar in the same district, and one didn't know what the other was doing. So even within the not-for-profit community, there wasn't collaboration. Forget the fact that we need that collaboration between corporates and government and not-for-profits, all different parts who essentially don't necessarily trust each other, and getting these different strains beginning to work together. And the best examples where it works is when they come together. And let me give you an example, because this is both, for water and sanitation. In Moradabad, and I saw this actually through my HSBC years, we sponsored a project where it was WWF working with the local community and an excellent collector who's the government designated head there. And you need that magic, and that collector was very critical to this. So what really started was a citizen education movement to show everyone there that the water that they were in fact using was laced with metals. And Moradabad is a huge exporter of brasswares which go all over the world. And, whole generations have grown up basically making big and small items of metal, particularly of brassware. So in fact, they had not even realized that they had messed up their water to the point that their children were drinking this messed up metal water, which was really bad for them. So it needed the sort of small scale industries there, which were it was their livelihood, to understand and come together to sort out the effluent, to look after their water, and to ensure that they were not polluting. So that was the citizen action part of it, and the awareness. Once the awareness was there, they worked to ensure the continuity of the program. So the levers of what needed to happen to keep the water clean. But the collector who did all of this, 2 years there, went on. And often projects fail when that government champion disappears. But here, because the citizens owned the program, and it took the not-for-profit NGOs, WWF, etc., to ensure it happened, continuity is established. So I think the citizen part becomes key for continuity. You need government because they become the initial incentive giver, and without them, it's very hard to get going. You need the not-for-profit because they help galvanize and activate. And as in this case, the corporate support and money that came in that enabled all of this was key. And it is these sort of projects which I believe are the mainstay of the country, where ideally all four parts work together, but at least the three, which is government / corporate for the funding, and the NGO and citizens come together to ensure that this works. And I think citizens are going to be key, and that is what the Swachh Bharat mission in India has achieved, that the awareness by people of cleanliness and hygiene and the messaging around it. And in fact, I'm hoping going forward, we can begin to ask people, do they know where this shit goes? So that they begin to ask government that question, so that government becomes accountable to ensuring that fecal sludge is properly treated, is the kind of citizen action that becomes critical, because it makes everyone accountable and citizens themselves come forward to ensure that the implementation happens in the way it should.
Absolutely. I think that's a really good lesson, that strong citizen action is what's necessary, and this sort of civic revolution can be inspired by the government. It's the one who started it in the first place and triggered that, just like Gandhiji did many years ago. And then it's continued by the citizens. I think that's excellent. And if the citizens have this in their mindset as well, then that triggers the business opportunities. I think this is something that the circular economy principle is being promoted by among others, the Toilet Board Coalition, and offers opportunities for businesses and entrepreneurs who are all from civil society to run profitable sanitation businesses and attract green finance. But it's still it will be difficult to attract investment that focuses on serving the poorest and hardest to reach. I think, this will usually require some form of cross-subsidy, perhaps, or do you see other options there?
So you're right. I mean, the sort of for-profit model where we need the entrepreneurs will tend much more towards services in the urban area, because it's not just about technology. There's been maybe a lot of focus on technology, and we need that, toilets with less water, low-cost toilets, etc. But it's also about the services. And, I love to use the example of what the municipality achieved in Kampala, where by enabling citizens to start businesses in collection of fecal sludge and delivery of it, all being done in a very clean, organized way, which did not require human handling, where these barrels of shit, which just pretty much slipped under a pot and was sealed and put outside the slum dweller's home for collection, went out to a factory through a wheelbarrow, bus sort of collection mechanism to be treated and was used as fertilizer for cotton fields around. And it created 10 millionaires. So those are the sort of models which don't require a NASA scientist or technology to really happen. It's really connecting the dots to a point where everyone in that process makes money, is allowed to make money, that government then doesn't step in and say, hey, you can't be making money off citizens. It should be an agreed pricing, not a rapacious pricing. But once done, we allow people to prosper, delivering essential services such as the whole process of sanitation and waste handling as it exists. So I think these models of both from the service in front and entrepreneurship from the technologies and the provisions therein, it could be from the running of community toilets, it could be from the treatment of fecal sludge, all areas where money is to be made. But I agree that for rural India, it's somewhat harder. But to the extent that we see that fecal sludge is also a wealth that can be used because it's rich in nutrients and with the right treatment, it's fertilizer, and fertilizer helps in the fields, provided it's properly treated. It is those linkages which we need to ensure get properly handled and worked on. And there is money to be made. I have seen models in solar lanterns where money is made from a woman who runs a solar bank which charges the solar lanterns which light up villages, or the water treatment bank where people come to collect water and the poor pay for these services. So it's not like it's not possible to have these models, but they have to be developed, created, and assistance provided to make these happen. And it can happen in a micro enterprise at the rural level, but of course much easier at the urban level. But at both, we need more entrepreneurs in this space. And there are estimates, and I provide this in my book, where the number of jobs that we could be seeing from as green jobs is, can run into millions of jobs for a country like ours, which is so underserved in these spaces. And as much as 40% of those green jobs would be in areas to do with sanitation and waste management.
Fantastic. Well, this is almost like a second revolution of business in sanitation, which is great. I mean, and I guess that's the role of this India Sanitation Coalition, to sort of pull all of these different parts together. I mean, can you tell us, why did you set up the India Sanitation Coalition? I mean, and how do you see it evolving when India declares open defecation free in 2019?
Well, why did we set it up? I mean, it's, to my mind, as an Indian who was very engaged in the water space, and in fact, I was in Stockholm at World Water Week, and hanging my head in shame as inevitably the conversations also covered sanitation, and India was sort of declared, the sort of world polluter in this space. And people wringing their hands in despair, saying, hey, the country wasn't doing enough, and Bangladesh had moved ahead, as indeed it had, and India had a long ways to go, which it still does. But the journey we've covered the last 4 years, I think, has closed the gap between where we need to be and where we started off. So it was really the inspiration coming from being exposed to how the rest of the world looked at India, and the connection between that and the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. Because if you look at sanitation and water, Without it, we can't tick many of the boxes on SDGs. So it became critical to work in these spaces. And one of our big agendas at the India Sanitation Coalition is bringing corporate India into this, because corporate India didn't dabble in sanitation. They were very focused on things to do with education and health, but didn't see sanitation and health as a connection, or sanitation and education as a connection. So we've helped them cover that. And in fact, we've not just unlocking the CSR money, or the corporate, sort of sustainability money that corporates spend, and trying to encourage them to put it into these sanitation agendas, but also on corporate volunteering, where we are taking forward a program called Swachhta Doots, which had been developed by Hindustan Unilever for their factory workers, where we are now taking this to other companies, and their factory workers will be messengers of change in the villages around the factory. So the role of corporates becomes key, and that was a very important part of what we wanted to do at the Sanitation Coalition. And then, of course, as mentioned earlier, to help create a platform for these collaborations between government, corporates, not-for-profits, funders, citizens, so that we can get better examples of collaboration across all these spaces.
Excellent. I mean, it's obviously the much needed intermediary role that an issue so complex as sanitation definitely needs. But I couldn't help noticing on the IRC website that many of the members are all women. That can't be a coincidence. Why is a gender-based focus on sanitation so important, do you think?
Yeah. Well, I think just a lot of the talent that we've tapped into were women. I'm happy to mention to you now that for our Maharashtra initiative, while the head is a woman, her 3 other members that work with her are all guys. So it's not that they don't exist. We managed to tap into them. And we're getting better with the gender mix. But I'm delighted that we have this very talented, driven bunch of women who work with us and have helped us through a journey where we also had to correct course and learn as we went along, and learn to scale back our own ambitions as we worked. But I'm happy to state that even in our 3-year journey, what we're doing has been noticed. We've been awarded by the government for some of the work we're doing. And it is gratifying to at least note that while we can never fulfill our own ambitions, at least what we manage to do gets noticed from time to time.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Naina, and thank you for your incredible contribution to the cause. I think so many people appreciate your work, especially the India Sanitation Coalition. And for anyone listening, to check out Naina's book, is an absolutely essential part of fighting the sanitation fight, which is again called Survival Sink: An Action Agenda for Sanitation, Water Pollution and Green Finance. So Naina, thanks for coming on the Wash Talk podcast.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. I'm delighted that we could do this, and delighted that you push these great causes. Thank you.
That was Naina Lal Kidwai of the India Sanitation Coalition. Thanks, Naina, for speaking to me on the Wash Talk podcast. If you like this discussion and would like to help do your own thing to raise awareness about the sanitation challenge in India, then why don't you share it? Share it on social media and use the hashtag WashTalk to join the conversation with your peers. So don't miss the next episode in a few weeks. But until then, thank you all for listening.